The blood trickled down Grace Matthews' forehead as she ran through the moonlit plains of Montana Territory, 1875. Her husband's final blow had split her eyebrow, but it was the promise in his drunken eyes, "Next time I'll kill you," that gave her feet wings despite her exhaustion. 3 days on the run with nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's locket clutched in her trembling hand, Grace had reached the end of her strength. When the faint glow of a cabin appeared on the horizon, she nearly collapsed with relief. The night was bitter cold, the wind cutting through her torn dress as she stumbled the final yards to the porch. Her knuckles barely made a sound as she knocked, her consciousness fading. As the door swung open, Grace looked up into the startled blue eyes of a tall stranger, his rugged face illuminated by lantern light. "Please," she whispered, swaying dangerously. The man's expression changed from surprise to concern as he took in her bruised face and desperate state. Without hesitation, he reached out and steadied her with gentle hands that belied his powerful frame. "You're safe now, madam," he said in a deep voice that carried the hint of a southern drawl. "You're home now." Grace's world went black as she collapsed into the arms of a man whose name she didn't even know. Isaac Miller had lived alone for 3 years since returning from the war, preferring the company of his horses and the vast open landscape to the complications of town life. At 32, he had built a modest ranch 10 miles outside of Whispering Creek, making a quiet living breaking horses and raising cattle. The appearance of an injured woman on his doorstep in the middle of the night was about as welcome as a rattlesnake in his boot, but he couldn't turn away someone so clearly in need. He carried her slight form to his bed, noting the wedding band on her finger and the pattern of bruises that told a story he'd seen too many times before. After cleaning the cut on her brow and covering her with his warmest quilt, Isaac settled into his chair by the fire, his Winchester across his lap. Whoever had done this might come looking, and Isaac Miller wasn't a man who took chances. Grace awoke with the sunrise, momentary panic gripping her heart as she found herself in an unfamiliar bed. The events of the night before rushed back, and she sat up gingerly, her body protesting every movement. The cabin was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace, a small table with 2 chairs, and sparse furnishings that spoke of a solitary life. "You're awake." The deep voice startled her. The man from last night stood in the doorway, holding a steaming mug. He approached slowly as one might a spooked horse. "It's just coffee, thought you might need it." Grace accepted the mug with shaking hands. "Thank you, Mr. Miller, Isaac Miller." He kept his distance, settling into a chair across the room. "And you are?" She hesitated, fear making her cautious. Grace Matthews, Mrs. Matthews," he acknowledged with a nod toward her ring finger. Grace instinctively covered the gold band with her other hand. "Not anymore," she whispered. "I can't go back." Isaac studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You don't have to, madam, not while you're here." "I don't want to impose. If you could just point me toward town, Whispering Creek's 10 miles east," he interrupted. "But with those injuries, you won't make it half that distance." "Rest here a few days. There's no one to bother you." Grace wanted to refuse to maintain what little independence she had left, but the thought of continuing her journey in her condition was overwhelming. "Why would you help a stranger?" Isaac's eyes, the color of a summer sky, held hers steadily. "Because someone once did the same for me when I needed it most." He stood, towering over her small frame. "I'll be outside tending to the horses. Holler if you need anything." The door closed behind him, leaving Grace alone with her thoughts and the first sense of safety she'd felt in years. Over the next few days, Grace regained her strength. Isaac kept his distance, sleeping in the barn and entering the cabin only to bring food or check on her well-being. He asked no questions about her past, and she volunteered nothing. It was an unspoken arrangement that suited them both. On the 4th morning, Grace woke to find a dress laid across the foot of the bed, simple, practical, and far too large for her frame, but clean and whole, unlike her tattered garment. A note beside it read simply, "Found this in a trunk. Belonged to my sister before she moved east. Help yourself." Grateful for the gesture, Grace changed into the dress, using a length of rope as a belt to gather the excess material. When she emerged from the cabin, she found Isaac in the corral, working with a spirited bay mare who seemed determined to throw him. Grace watched in fascination as he moved with the horse, his voice a constant, soothing murmur that she couldn't quite make out. There was something mesmerizing about the way man and beast communicated, a language of trust being built before her eyes. "She's beautiful," Grace called out when the horse finally settled, allowing Isaac to stroke her neck. He turned, surprise evident on his face. "First time she's let anyone this close. Been working with her for 2 weeks." Grace approached the fence cautiously. "What's her name?" "Doesn't have one yet. Haven't earned the right to name her." Isaac led the mare to the fence. "Want to meet her?" Grace hesitated, then extended her hand palm up as she'd seen Isaac do. The horse sniffed suspiciously before nudging against her fingers. "Hello, beautiful," she whispered. "Well, I'll be damned," Isaac murmured. "She doesn't take to strangers." "Neither do I," Grace said with a small smile, the first he'd seen from her. "Perhaps we recognize something in each other." Isaac studied her for a moment. "Perhaps," he cleared his throat. "Feeling strong enough to help with supper. I'm a fair hand at most things, but cooking isn't one of them. I'd be glad to earn my keep." That evening, they shared their first meal together at the table rather than with Grace sequestered in bed. The stew she'd prepared from Isaac's modest provisions was simple but flavorful, and he ate with an appreciation that made her cheeks warm. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" he asked, sopping up the last of the gravy with a piece of bread. "My grandmother." She believed a good meal could solve most of life's troubles. Grace's smile faded. "At least the ones that can be solved." Isaac set down his spoon. "Your husband, he's the one who did that to you." He gestured to her face, where the bruises were turning from purple to a sickly yellow-green. Grace stiffened. "I should clean up." "I'm not asking for details, Mrs. Matthews. Just want to know if I should be expecting company of the unwelcome variety." She sank back into her chair. "Thomas doesn't know where I am. I ran for 3 days, slept in fields. He's the foreman at the Sullivan mining operation over in Bitter Creek, has men who'd help him search, but..." She twisted her wedding band. "I don't think he'd bother. He'll just find someone else to," she couldn't finish. "Well, if he does come looking, he'll find more than he bargained for." Isaac's tone was matter-of-fact, not threatening, but Grace believed him nonetheless. "Thank you," she met his eyes. "For everything." He nodded once, then rose to fetch something from a cabinet. "Thought you might want this." He placed a book on the table, a well-worn copy of Pride and Prejudice. "Found it at the general store last time I was in town. Never got around to reading it myself." Grace touched the cover reverently. "My favorite. I had to leave mine behind. Then it's yours now." In that moment, something shifted between them, a recognition that her stay might not be as temporary as either had initially believed. As weeks turned into a month, Grace and Isaac fell into a comfortable routine. She took over the cooking and mending while he taught her about the workings of the ranch. She proved to be a quick learner, especially with the horses. The unnamed mare became particularly attached to Grace, following her around the corral like a loyal dog. "You should name her," Isaac said one afternoon as they watched the horse prance around the paddock. "That's your privilege. She chose you, not me." He leaned against the fence post. "What would you call her?" Grace considered for a moment. "Liberty," she said finally. "Because she's wild at heart but willing to trust if you earn it." Isaac's gaze shifted from the horse to Grace. "Fitting." As spring turned to summer, Grace's bruises faded completely, but she made no mention of leaving. Isaac never asked her to stay, but he began to include her in his plans for the ranch, discussing the possibility of expanding the corral and adding a proper garden plot next season. They rarely spoke of the past, but one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson, Isaac broke their unspoken rule. "I was married once," he said quietly. "Her name was Emily. She died of fever while I was away fighting." Got the letter 3 months after she was in the ground. Grace placed her hand over his. "I'm sorry. Came back here to die myself," he continued. "Figured I'd drink myself to the grave or pick a fight with the wrong man." Then one morning I woke up and realized Emily would have boxed my ears for wasting the life she didn't get to have. He turned his hand to clasp Grace's. That's when I started building this place. It's beautiful, Grace said sincerely, a testament to her memory. No, it was just an escape. Somewhere to hide from the world. His blue eyes reflected the dying light. Until you arrived, Grace felt her heart quicken. Isaac, a distant sound interrupted them, hoofbeats approaching fast. Isaac was on his feet instantly, guiding Grace toward the door. Get inside. Take my rifle from beside the bed. You remember how to use it, she nodded, fear clutching at her throat. Isaac, if it's Thomas, then he's about to learn some manners. Go, Grace hurried inside, retrieving the Winchester with trembling hands. Through the window, she watched as 3 riders approached the cabin. Even in the fading light, she recognized the broad shoulders and distinctive hat of the lead rider. Thomas. Isaac stood his ground on the porch, his stance relaxed but alert. Grace could see the revolver holstered at his hip, though he made no move to draw it as the men reined in their horses. Evening, gentlemen. Isaac's voice carried clearly through the partially open window. Something I can help you with. Thomas Matthews dismounted, his familiar bulk sending a shiver of dread through Grace. Looking for my wife. Tracks led this way. Dark-haired woman, small, ran off a while back. Can't say I've seen anyone matching that description, Isaac replied evenly. Not many travelers come this way. Thomas took a step closer, hand resting on his gun. Mind if we take a look inside? She's unwell, needs to come home for her own good. I mind very much, Isaac said, not moving an inch. A man's home is his own, and I don't recall extending an invitation. The tension crackled between them as Thomas sized up the leaner but equally tall rancher. The 2 men accompanying Thomas shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. Thomas, one called. Sheriff said to ask around, not cause trouble. If she ain't here, she ain't here. Thomas's eyes narrowed. My wife stole from me before she left. Money, jewelry, family heirlooms. That makes her a thief, and I aim to see justice done. Grace felt a surge of anger cut through her fear. The only thing she'd taken was her mother's locket, the very item Thomas had repeatedly threatened to sell when he was drinking away their money. Isaac's posture changed subtly, a predator preparing to strike if necessary. Your wife sounds like a troublesome woman. If I see her, I'll be sure to point her toward the sheriff's office rather than your tender care. The implication wasn't lost on Thomas. His face darkened with rage. You suggesting I mistreat my own wife, stranger? I'm suggesting that a man whose wife flees in the night might want to examine his own behavior before casting blame. Isaac's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the words. Now, it's getting late, and I've got an early start tomorrow. I wish you luck finding your wife, though. If she's gone to such lengths to leave, perhaps letting her go would be the gentlemanly thing to do. For a tense moment, Grace thought Thomas would draw his gun. Instead, he spat on the ground near Isaac's boots. I'll be back with the sheriff. You'd best pray she's not hiding here. Bring him, Isaac said with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sheriff Davies and I served together. He'll be interested to hear about a man hunting his wife like she's property. Thomas's confidence faltered visibly. Without another word, he mounted his horse and wheeled around, his companions following close behind. Isaac remained on the porch until the riders disappeared into the gathering darkness. When he entered the cabin, he found Grace standing by the window, rifle still clutched in her hands. He'll be back, she whispered. He won't give up. Isaac gently took the rifle from her grip. Then we'll be ready, but I suspect he'll think twice now that he knows the sheriff might not take his side. He guided her to a chair. Did you take anything that belonged to him? Grace pulled the locket from beneath her dress. Only this. It was my mother's. He always threatened to sell it. Isaac examined the simple silver oval with its delicate engraving. Not exactly a fortune in stolen jewels. He returned it to her. Grace, I want you to know something. Whatever happens, you have a home here for as long as you want it. But if you'd prefer to move on, I understand. I can arrange passage to Denver or even further east. Grace looked around the cabin that had become more of a home to her in a few months than the house she'd shared with Thomas for 3 years. Is that what you want, for me to leave? No, he answered without hesitation. That's the last thing I want." Their eyes met, and the unspoken feelings that had been growing between them filled the space between them. Grace rose from her chair and moved toward him slowly. "Then I'll stay," she said softly, "if you'll have me." Isaac reached out, his calloused fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw. "I've been alone a long time, Grace, got used to the quiet, then you came, and suddenly the silence was the loneliest sound I'd ever heard." She leaned into his touch. "I was never really living before I came here, just surviving from one day to the next. And now I know what it means to feel safe, to be respected." She placed her hand over his heart. "To be seen." Isaac drew her closer, giving her every chance to pull away. When she didn't, he lowered his lips to hers in a kiss so tender it brought tears to her eyes. "I'm still married," she whispered against his mouth. "In name only," he replied, "but I'll wait as long as it takes for that to change." The next morning, they rode into Whispering Creek together. Grace wore Isaac's sister's dress and a borrowed hat pulled low over her face. The small town consisted of a main street lined with wooden buildings, a general store, saloon, hotel, and at the end, the sheriff's office. Sheriff Davies was a broad-shouldered man with a thick mustache and keen eyes that missed nothing. He recognized Isaac immediately, greeting him with a firm handshake. "Miller, been a while since you graced us with your presence." His gaze shifted to Grace. "Madam." Isaac closed the office door behind them. "James, we need your help. This is Grace Matthews, her husband, Thomas Matthews." The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "He was in here yesterday, claiming his wife stole from him and ran off." "Did he mention this?" Isaac gestured to Grace's face, where the faintest trace of bruising remained visible. Understanding dawned in the sheriff's eyes. "I see." He offered Grace a chair. "Mrs. Matthews, I'd like to hear your side of things, if you don't mind." For the first time, Grace spoke openly about the 3 years of her marriage, the initial charm that had won her heart, followed by Thomas's growing possessiveness and rage, fueled by drink and gambling debts. She showed the sheriff her locket, the only item she'd taken. "I just couldn't bear it anymore," she finished quietly. "The last time he said he would kill me, and I believed him." Sheriff Davies rubbed his mustache thoughtfully. "Law's complicated when it comes to marriage, Mrs. Matthews. But no man has the right to beat his wife, no matter what some folks might think." He leaned back in his chair. "Matthews is still in town, staying at the hotel, been drinking heavily since yesterday." Isaac tensed. "If he tries to force her to go back, he won't," Davies interrupted firmly. "Not while I'm sheriff, but Mrs. Matthews, you should know that divorce isn't easy to obtain, especially for a woman. Could take years, and it would mean facing him in court." Grace's heart sank. "Then I'll remain married to him in name, even if I never see him again." "There might be another way," the sheriff said slowly. "Montana Territory has some progressive laws regarding abandonment and cruelty. If you file a formal complaint, I can keep it on record. After a year, you might have grounds for divorce without his cooperation." Hope bloomed in Grace's chest. "I'll do whatever it takes." As they left the sheriff's office, Isaac kept a protective hand at the small of Grace's back. They were halfway to where they'd left their horses when a shout cut through the quiet morning. "Grace." Thomas Matthews stumbled from the saloon, his face flushed with alcohol despite the early hour. "I knew that rancher was lying." Isaac stepped in front of Grace as Thomas advanced, but she placed a hand on his arm. "No, Isaac, I need to face him." Before Isaac could protest, Grace moved forward to confront the man who had terrorized her for years. Though she trembled inside, her voice remained steady. "It's over, Thomas. I'm not coming back." Thomas's face twisted with rage. "You're my wife." "You have no right." "She has every right not to be beaten," Isaac interrupted, his tone deadly calm. "Every right to safety and respect." Thomas lunged toward Grace, but found himself staring down the barrel of Sheriff Davies's revolver before he could reach her. "That's far enough, Matthews," the sheriff warned. "Mrs. Matthews has filed a complaint against you for cruelty. You lay a hand on her and you'll find yourself in my jail." A small crowd had gathered, watching the confrontation with undisguised interest. Thomas looked around, suddenly aware of the public spectacle he was creating. "This isn't over," he snarled, but the threat sounded hollow even to his own ears. Yes, it is, Grace replied firmly. Go back to Bitter Creek, Thomas. Find someone else to control. I'm done. With that, she turned her back on him, something she would never have dared do before, and walked with Isaac to their waiting horses. Behind them, the sheriff kept Thomas at bay until they had mounted and ridden out of town. As they crested the hill overlooking the valley where Isaac's ranch nestled like a haven, Grace felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Do you think he'll come after us again? Isaac shook his head. Men like Thomas prey on fear. When it's gone, they move on to easier targets. He reached across the space between them to take her hand. Besides, I meant what I said to the sheriff. No one will hurt you again while I'm breathing. Grace squeezed his fingers. I've spent so long being afraid, I'm not sure I remember how to live without looking over my shoulder. Then we'll learn together, Isaac promised. One day at a time, through the summer and into fall, they did just that. Grace planted a garden that flourished under her care, while Isaac expanded his herd with the proceeds from selling several of his trained horses. Liberty, the bay mare, became Grace's constant companion, carrying her across the ranch and through the meadows with a spirit that matched her name. They were careful to maintain proprieties when they ventured into town, with Grace continuing to wear her wedding band, though she had moved into Isaac's heart, if not his bed. The townsfolk of Whispering Creek accepted the arrangement with minimal gossip, especially after Sheriff Davies made it clear that Grace was under his protection. Thomas Matthews never returned. Word reached them through the sheriff that he had taken a job with a mining operation in Idaho Territory, apparently deciding that pursuing Grace wasn't worth the trouble. On a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year after Grace had first appeared on Isaac's doorstep, they rode into town together. At the sheriff's office, Grace signed the final papers that would begin the dissolution of her marriage based on abandonment and documented cruelty. It'll take some time for the territorial judge to process these, Sheriff Davies explained, but it's just a formality now. For all intents and purposes, Mrs. Matthews, you're a free woman. Outside, the town was preparing for its autumn harvest festival. Colorful bunting decorated the main street, and the smell of apple pies and roasting corn filled the air. Isaac took Grace's hand as they walked toward the celebration. Would you care to accompany me to the festival, Miss Grace? He asked formally, though his eyes danced with private meaning. I would be delighted, Mr. Miller, she replied with equal ceremony. They spent the day among the townspeople, many of whom greeted them warmly. Grace, who had once been so isolated by Thomas's jealousy, found herself surrounded by friendly faces and genuine conversation. Isaac never left her side, his quiet presence a constant reassurance. As the sun began to set, a fiddler struck up a lively tune in the town square. Couples formed circles for dancing, their laughter rising into the evening air. May I have this dance? Isaac extended his hand to Grace. She hesitated only briefly. I'm not very practiced. Thomas never allowed. Then it's high time you learned, he interrupted gently. And I happen to be an excellent teacher. Under the glow of paper lanterns, Isaac guided Grace through the steps of a simple country dance. She stumbled at first, but soon found the rhythm, her body moving in harmony with his as they twirled among the other dancers. When the music slowed to a waltz, he drew her closer, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers as if it were made of porcelain. I never thought I could be this happy again, he murmured for her ears alone. After Emily died, I believed that part of my life was over. Grace looked up at him, her heart in her eyes. And I never knew what happiness truly was until I found you. As the music ended, Isaac didn't release her. Instead, he led her away from the crowd to a quiet spot beneath an old oak tree at the edge of town. From his pocket, he withdrew a small leather pouch. I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment. He opened the pouch and tipped a delicate gold ring with a small pearl into his palm. It was my mother's. My father gave it to her when they settled in this valley, promising her a life they would build together. Grace's breath caught as Isaac knelt before her. I know you're still legally tied to another man, he said quietly. But in my heart, you've been free to choose your own path since the day you arrived. I'm asking you to choose me, Grace. To make a life with me, however long it takes for the law to catch up to what we already know to be true. Tears spilled down Grace's cheeks as she looked at this man who had shown her what love should be: patient, kind, and unwavering. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times yes. Isaac slipped the ring onto her finger where it nestled against the wedding band she would soon remove forever. When he rose to his feet, he gathered her in his arms and kissed her with a promise of all the tomorrows they would share. 3 months later, on a clear winter morning, Grace stood beside Isaac in the small church in Whispering Creek. Her divorce had been granted with surprising speed, thanks to Sheriff Davies's influence with the territorial judge. She wore a simple blue dress that matched Isaac's eyes, and wildflowers he had somehow procured despite the season adorned her dark hair. As they spoke their vows before the minister and the handful of friends they had made, Grace thought of how far she had come from that desperate night when she had fled one life and stumbled into another. The bruises had long since faded, but the strength she had discovered within herself remained, nurtured by Isaac's unwavering belief in her. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Isaac kissed her with reverence and joy, sealing their covenant before all who witnessed it. As they walked from the church into the bright winter sunshine, he leaned down to whisper in her ear, "Welcome home, Mrs. Miller." Grace smiled up at the man who had opened not just his door but his heart to her. "I've been home since the moment you found me," she replied. "I just didn't know it yet." Hand in hand, they rode back to the ranch that they now truly shared, not as a place of refuge, but as the foundation of the life they would build together. As they crossed the threshold of the cabin, Isaac swept Grace into his arms, carrying her over the doorway as tradition dictated. Inside, the fire crackled warmly, and on the table sat a new book, a copy of Jane Eyre that Isaac had ordered from Denver as a wedding gift. Beside it lay the deed to the ranch, now bearing both their names. "To new beginnings," Isaac said, setting her gently on her feet. "And to happy endings," Grace replied, rising on tiptoe to kiss the man who had taught her that love wasn't something to fear, but something to cherish. Outside, Liberty whinnied from the corral, as if offering her own blessing to the union. Above the ranch, stars began to appear in the darkening sky, bearing witness to two souls who had found in each other not just safety, but the courage to believe in love again.